Hello and welcome back to the Reflective Account. This is our third week in our mighty couple, and let's have a look at this week's summary. So one of the things we looked at this week was sponsor fit, and how brands will try and align themselves with a product or service or in a sponsorship deal that kind of aligns with their image. And we'll be looking at some sponsor fit deals that perhaps were a little bit different in this week's reflection. We also had a look at sponsorship proposal management and asset inventory, which of course is one of our tasks during the next sort of few weeks. So we looked at some of the price and the ways that we can create an asset inventory of things that we can use to essentially sell in a sponsorship deal. And we also looked at customer loyalty, and not just between the customers and the final buyer of the product, but also in that sponsorship agreement and making sure both parties are satisfied with that. So let's get straight into it. So my sort of reflection to kind of find out what makes a good sponsor fit, I thought it'd be best to look at some that perhaps made consumers scratch their head a little bit. So with the Averno, which turned out to be the official ladder of the NCAA basketball championship, at the end, the winning team would sort of cut the net down, and so Averno tried to hijack that sort of tradition. But the kind of problem I see with it is you don't usually necessarily associate college basketball with DIY equipment. So that was a little bit confusing. Again, with the David Beckham and the fish, obviously David Beckham's a huge, or maybe was a little bit when he was actually playing a little bit more, a huge ambassador for a lot of things and a big image. With a frozen fish, again, it's a little bit, you're questioning, what has he got to do with it, and is it just because he has a massive following in terms of football that you can just hijack that up? You don't really need to think about the product, perhaps. And again, with the headache relief, so that was sponsored by or sponsoring a speedway, and the product itself is okay, but from what I read, it just seemed people were just a bit confused, and the name of the race was a little bit confusing as well. Now with the Coors Light one, as you see on the bottom right, is a little bit different. So that turned out to be a bad fit, no fault of the organization. So it turned out that the head coach at I believe USC, the Trojans there, that the head coach showed up under the influence of alcohol. So kind of having an alcohol sponsor in the stadium kind of makes things a little bit uncomfortable. So when we're talking about sponsor fit, it may not necessarily be a fit with the product and the organization, but more about how it's perceived in the general public. So this seems to be one of the strangest ones that I've come across. So in the 2003 and 2004 season, Atletico Madrid, a Spanish football team in the top tier of Spanish football, had a sponsorship deal with Columbia Pictures, obviously a well-known movie company. So the idea was that throughout the season, for the sort of film that they were promoting at the time, that the team would have that stripper along their jersey. And again, with football or soccer, fans typically take pride in sort of having that kit, and sometimes the kits, back when I was a little bit younger, the kits used to last sort of 2 to 3 years in terms of the team wouldn't change their sponsors. Now the sponsors change every year, and they have actually different kits for different games. So away games, they'll have a different sponsor, and home games, they'll have a different sponsor. So it's a little bit different now. But back then, they sort of took pride in having your kit look exactly as the team's. Now with this, again, it's a little bit confusing, especially from a football fan, because one, the image on some of them aren't even particularly well illustrated. As you can see with Closer and Anaconda on the bottom right, they're simply just blue, a blue writing of the movie. I think Spider-Man and SWAT at least and Hellboy look a little bit different. But again, it's sort of that response from the consumer. Perhaps there's not necessarily anything wrong with a football team joining in with a movie and sort of picture business, but having that, sort of having your kit, in some football fans will say kind of defiled, doesn't leave a good taste in the mouth. So this was definitely one, that had people thinking is a little bit weird, and it hasn't really been done since. So perhaps that's something that perhaps all of football have learned from this experience. So this is probably an example of how sponsor fit can work. And when you think of maybe Chicago White Sox, the baseball team, and 7-Eleven, you don't really think that those two should do as well in terms of sponsor fit. But as part of a deal, the White Sox weeknight home games were going to start at 7:11 p.m. instead of the typical 7:05. So this is kind of a great use of sort of very original and very clever sponsorship deal, which is tailored to both these teams. And we did talk about it in class about the shotgun approach and how it can kind of seem lazy and it's very generic. And if you're going to approach a company, they're going to want to feel like you've taken time to think about these things. And there's no other company that can pull this off as cleverly as 7-Eleven, simply because that's the name of their company, and it just happens to be the sort of time, or around the sort of time that a midweek game would start. So that's an example of sort of clever sponsorship that kind of works. And if you didn't know, I thought I'd leave this in, that the N on 7-Eleven is lowercase, if you didn't know. And from what I read, it's simply because the logo looks less intimidating with the lowercase n. So yeah, next time you walk in next to a 7-Eleven, you'll hopefully remember this, and hopefully you'll pass that information on. So I kind of wanted to share some of my reflections on kind of researching about how customer loyalty is, or real customer loyalty is created, and how sponsorship can sort of play its part in that. So we talk a lot about setting up ways of communication with customers. So now we kind of find it quite common for people who are unhappy with their product to kind of take to media platforms such as Twitter to kind of voice their unhappiness across. And companies are now making it more of a thing that they monitor that, and that they can address that as well, because your answer will be sort of on view to whoever's looking. So you definitely want to make sure you create a good light in that. And we'll be discussing a little bit later about the impact of dealing with unhappy customers and how that can affect business down the line. So providing extra perks. So again, it's not just in terms of a customer or the end product. If we're talking about a deal, let's bring up Scotiabank and the Raptors. Perhaps, well, I assume they would, that the Raptors would provide some sort of luxury box for Scotiabank, and they'll be able to bring in their clients or just use it for themselves, and that's kind of an extra perk, for them in that sense. Give customers a reason to be loyal. So this is as easy as sort of free stuff. I've got bumper stickers here, and perhaps that can be sort of funded on the sponsor side or those things. Maybe doing little competitions where they can give away things a little bit like Monopoly and McDonald's and that kind of deal, and giving stuff away and giving people an incentive to either create a happy association with the brand, or for them to come back for more. And lastly, not relying too much on technology. So this one's one from Professor Hyatt. He did mention how he doesn't like automated phone messages in terms of, when you're purchasing tickets and things like that, which is true. You could look at saving money from these things, but are you potentially turning away customers who perhaps just want to talk to a human being, perhaps, which is not always, not every company does it, and some companies sort of have different philosophies on that. But yeah, I would say if you wanted to create a loyal customer, it's perhaps easier to speak to a human being. So this is just a cycle I wanted to illustrate to kind of build off that customer loyalty and kind of add in parts in my own experience with certain products or sort of brands. So sort of that awareness stage. So it's about a brand, and you don't really have a strong bond or attraction to it, and you are easily susceptible to other companies or competition. So for me, it's Callaway Golf. I know of Callaway, but I haven't got any attraction to it or attachment to it. And if I was to go to golf, I wouldn't necessarily go to Callaway. And if another company had to come with another product or something that I liked, I would be easily be able to be taken away from them. Then you start to go to this interest, or what I'd say sort of the initial purchase. So this is kind of your first ability, or your first opportunity, to be wowed or upset by the product or the service. So in last year in sport marketing, we were having a discussion about where does the sort of experience start for, let's say, a basketball game. I'd make the argument that it starts in the process of you purchasing your ticket. If you had a bad time purchasing a ticket online, for example, you kind of go into that event kind of thinking, yeah, well, before the event's even started, I've kind of got a bad taste, so to speak, in my mouth about it. And we even talked about it in another class about the Milwaukee Bucks actually having the best or voted the best customer service with their phone ticket service, because they actually they averaged answering the phone in 7 seconds, while the rest of the league was around the 1 minute mark. So that initial purchase is very important, because it either wow or upset the customer. Then you kind of go into this sort of post-purchase evaluation, sort of subconsciously or consciously, you kind of evaluating the product or the service. So this might be a good time for sort of businesses to send out emails sort of asking how the event was, or hope you had a good time, or anything like that. And also it's an opportunity then for them to actually face customers who have had a bad experience. And a bad experience doesn't necessarily mean you've lost customer or even their loyalty. It actually might be an opportunity for a company to build a stronger loyalty. As a consumer, if you have a problem with a company or service and they handle it well, if it wasn't absolutely terrible, then you actually might go back to them because you know how they handle the situations, and you'll know that you're getting taken care of. Then we go into this sort of what I call decision to sort of repurchase. So as you have favorable attitudes to the product, and while there are alternatives out there that you know about, you kind of like this product. For me, it's why I got a phone. You want to put it up against an iPhone. For me, I like the phone I have, and I'll tell you, and there's not a lot Apple can do at this moment to take me away from that phone, because I've had such a good experience. And then we go on to sort of that retention or repurchase. So this is where a customer will completely reject the competitors. They may even stay with your product, even if it costs them more time, more money, or even performance, just simply because they have such a strong association with your product. And they'll also turn into sort of ambassadors for you. So that's me for Pepsi. I will happily pay more for Pepsi than I will for, let's say, Coca-Cola, and I will tell anyone who likes Coca-Cola more that they are wrong. Perhaps that can be linked to Pepsi's sponsorship with the NFL, and perhaps that I've got subconsciously sort of those messages about that relationship. Perhaps that's why I like Pepsi so much. But I'm just a an example of how strong or good sponsorship with a brand that people care about can end up turning into something like that, which of course is always good for a company like Pepsi. So finally for this week, I just wanted to look at the 4 types of loyalty and how spotting these consumers can perhaps help a business in their sort of sponsorship proposal. So first is those with no loyalty. So these are the customers to avoid. They're a waste of money, no matter how much sponsorship and advertising and free goods you throw at them, they just will not be loyal. This kind of speaks to the sort of 80 to 20 sort of ratio in terms of, majority of your business will essentially not come from everyone, so sort of avoid these people at all cost. Then you have inertia loyalty, and this is kind of the people who buy out of habit, and they'll be easily swayed if something more convenient comes up. So sort of the case of the shopping mall or shopping center you always go to beside your house. Maybe you don't go there because you like the goods or that it's necessarily cheaper, but just know that if somewhere else close opened up, you'd be very easily swayed. So you have to be careful of those ones, and understand that people don't necessarily use your product because they like it the most. Then we go to latent. So these are loyalty depending on situation, but you can still get loyalty if you sort of go to them in the right circumstances. So for me, I can see this kind of being like a real seasonal thing. So I know I used to work at a bowling alley, and during the autumn and the winter months, we used to have promotions on a Tuesday. It's half price bowling, and we always used to see the same people come in every Tuesday night, bowl the same amount of games, get the same drinks and food and whatnot. But as soon as the summer months came through, of course they weren't there as much. And of course, being in a bowling alley and it's a nice day outside, and you can understand those things. But it kind of speaks to the thing that you may not always have that loyalty perhaps all year round, and perhaps that's why many businesses run different promotions at different times of year. And then if we look into sort of the bigger aspect, I'm pretty sure there's a week in around autumn time in North America where baseball is the only major sport on TV. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there's a small little gap where there's no hockey, no football, no basketball. So if that was the case, you may want to look and say to sponsors, hey, look, we essentially got the eyes of North America because there's no other major sports on. And perhaps that's a good time to maybe run some sort of advertisement or some sort of sponsorship. And then lastly, premium loyalty. Very much like we just discussed. It's sort of the verbal advocates and people who take pleasure in telling others about your product. These are the ones that you want to keep happy and keep around. And they're also cheaper to keep around than than it is to try and get the non-loyal customers in. And on that note, we've finally made it to the end of this week's reflection. I hope you enjoyed today, and thank you very much for tuning in. And once again, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.